Today's Pool Nation product spotlight is liquid chlorine from Hasa, purest, strongest, and fastest working liquid chlorine available. To tell you more about this week's product spotlight is Hasa's own Terry Arko. He's been called the most shocking man in the business.
Good morning, guys. Welcome to the Pool Nation Live podcast with myself, your host, Edgar De Jesus. And yes, I am the reigning champion of Marco Polo, along with John, JJ Flawless, the fastest netter in the West, and the famous Zach, the pool boy Nicholas.
Oh, yeah.
Terry Arko about liquid chlorine, and we'll talk about everything there is to know about it, guys. And I want to welcome everybody to our live podcast, the podcast where it's all pool talk, and we ain't talking about netting and jetting or splashing and dashing. We're talking about becoming a nation of pool pros. And yes, we will talk about the latest products, trends, and training pool industry. But before we get started today, I want to thank our sponsors for this podcast, the Ultimate Pool Tools and Pool Invoice. I want to thank them for their continued support. Zach, good morning.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
How you doing?
Doing great. We had a really good week so far. Started it out by getting the maintenance team signed up for the chemistry training with Bob. Book should be in any day, so we're super excited about that. And then, following that up Wednesday with the live with the pool chasers, great information, really got me going and thinking about a lot of things that we could implement with our business. And now here we are on Friday, wrapping up the week with some more rain, getting the outer bands of Hurricane Delta. And, it's just enough to mess up the pools and make us have to work twice as hard next week. So looking forward to that.
Never ending, right? It feels like you kind of get everything back in control, and then boom, here comes the rain. Let's mess up those pools again. John, good morning. How you doing?
Good morning, Edgar. I'm doing well. I'm actually kind of excited. For the first time in months, we're actually below 100 degrees. Yeah, it's been quite a summer. And today I think it's going to be 98 degrees, and then tomorrow is going to be like 97, and then it'll go back up to the low 100s. But I'm pretty excited about the cool down. But I want to jump in and say and tag off of what Zach was talking about the certification class that Bob Lowry is going to have. Everybody out there that's listening, or anybody that's either new to the pool industry or people that are experienced that have 10, 20, 30 years, there is so much to learn from this class. We've taken personally just about every certification class we can get our hands on because we feel knowledge is power. And one of our favorites, if not our favorites, is Bob Lowry's class. If you're looking for information that is tangible, something that is very easy to understand, the way we had the pleasure to have Bob actually teach it himself when we were there, and the way he breaks it down is very easy to understand, so that you can take it and actually put it into effect the next day when you start working on your pools. So I just kind of wanted to touch in on that.
I think it's going to be a phenomenal class. I signed up. I'm really excited to take the class. And, I look back at all the days that I was doing a lot of the learning. And I think one of the things that our industry lacks a little bit is a lot of that structured training. So, and Bob talks about it a little bit, where some of the stuff that you learn is, from seminars and kind of people doing, speeches, and that kind of is how you get your education. And so I'm actually kind of excited because I haven't taken the CPO class, but this is going to be the first one. And I really want it to be something that I could turn around, like you say, and use the next day out in the field. So
absolutely.
Terry, good morning. How you doing?
Hey, good morning. Good morning, Edgar and Zach and John. Good to be here. And hey, I was just going to say, in you guys talking about the weather and everything, just remember in the pool industry, weather is pretty good job security. So it keeps you busy, right? And it keeps people need you. So that's always good. And then also about the training, I'm really excited that you guys got this going on with Bob Lowry. And Bob is really a great guy. He's a longtime friend of mine, and I hate to really age myself, but I first took water chemistry classes from Bob like back in the late 1970s. Back then Bob was kind of my idol. And I remember sitting in a water chemistry class with Bob Lowry and saying to myself, someday I'm going to be him. And I've sort of, that sort of got me going to where I am today. So it's a great class, so much useful information. And I'm excited that you guys are partnering with Bob on that.
Yeah, we're definitely all very, very excited about it. So, guys, we're going to be taking some calls today towards the end of the live, and we'll kind of bring that up a little bit later. So in case you guys have any questions for Terry with regards to liquid chlorine, we'll let you know as we get closer. So Terry, I want to thank you for coming and joining us today. I know you're a really busy guy, especially this time of the year with everything going on, and I appreciate you taking the time to come on. I wanted to have you come on our podcast because you know that we're dealing with that tab shortage, and I really want the guys to educate themselves on the different options that are out there. And last week we talked about Cal Hypo, and today I want you to teach us everything that there is about liquid chlorine. So guys, I did get an update yesterday, and that is that some of the distributors have bought large quantities of tabs from China. So they're trying to fill that void. But obviously, they're going to get hit with that tax when it comes in. And what that means is that you're going to be paying higher prices for it. And we talked about it in the other podcast. We've mentioned that other manufacturers would step in to produce it, or it could be imported to meet the demand, but the cost is going to be a lot higher for them. And really, they're talking anywhere between 120 to 150 bucks for a bucket of tabs. And so, guys, for you that are listening, I'm going to keep saying it so it's clear. You need to figure out your game plan, or your chemical costs, whatever you're going to figure out. But those chemical costs are going to be much higher next summer. So if you're not educating yourself and you don't have a game plan for next summer, you better have a rate increase letter in hand, or your profits are going to take a hit, guys. It's going to affect your pockets if you do nothing. So really what we want to do is educate you guys, talk about all the different methods so that you can look at them and put a game plan in place. So guys, with that being said, let's get ready to dive in. Let's get ready to talk about liquid chlorine and everything that there is to learn about it. John, you did a live a couple of weeks ago with Terry. Let me get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I know we did an Instagram live with Terry a couple of weeks ago, and we talked about liquid chlorine. And again, I want to thank Terry for doing that live, and I want to thank him again for taking the time out of his busy day to do this podcast with us so that it's available to anybody in this form of a podcast. So I want to talk in detail about liquid chlorine. I want the podcast not just to be about liquid chlorine, but something that if a new guy listens to it, he can use it as a learning tool as well. I want him to learn everything about liquid. We just did a great podcast on Cal Hypo, which was very detailed and explained everything Cal Hypo. So following up with the podcast explaining everything liquid chlorine seems like a perfect topic for today.
I'm going to agree with you 100%. I got so many calls from our last podcast thanking me on the content. And I even got a call from somebody out in California and said, hey, we're in the California market. We're most likely never going to use Cal Hypo, but I need to thank you because I learned so much about it and I can talk about it. And the biggest thing is I feel like I'm educated on it. That's really what our goal is, with our podcast. So I'm really excited about that.
Well, and what I really like about the last couple of lives is that we were talking about the shortage of tabs, but we're really diving into all of the details, and it's making us learn a lot more in detail about every option out there. And it's really getting me to start thinking about our business and our strategy on how to handle it all.
Yeah, Zach, again, same thing. I totally agree with you. And even I've learned a lot in the last couple of podcasts, and I'm really excited about it. And even after all these years, doing all the research and hearing, all the pros that have the knowledge and explaining it, just really kind of gets me with all that pool geek talk, huh, John? Excited and kind of wanting
absolutely.
More. All right, Terry. So what we're going to do is kind of start with some of the basics. And I know for some of the guys, like some of the questions are, that's kind of basic, but really we want even the guy that just started yesterday to be able to kind of dive in and follow along with us. So Terry, my first question to you is going to be, what is liquid chlorine and what concentrations does it come in?
Yeah, sure. Great. And I'll just, I'll kind of laugh and tell you that in the pool industry, we refer to it as liquid chlorine, but that makes most chemists and kind of scientist people sort of cringe because really it's not liquid chlorine. Liquid chlorine would be the pure form that's derived from the elemental gas and pretty dangerous stuff. But that being said, it's really not liquid chlorine. What it is it's a compound that has liquid chlorine in it. And the actual name that we call it is liquid sodium hypochlorite. So a lot of times when guys take my chemistry classes or whatever, they definitely learned liquid chlorine is liquid sodium hypochlorite, which is a compound of pure chlorine. So it contains pure chlorine, but it has some other formulations and ingredients in it. And actually, to really define it to something that everybody could relate to, sodium hypochlorite is actually liquid bleach. And it comes in varying strengths. Down from, you've got laundry bleach, that you could get in the store or whatever. And the laundry bleach usually runs 3 to 8%. And the most common that you're getting is probably about 6% that you're using in your wash or whatever. Pool strengths are typically going to run anywhere from about 10 up to 12.5%. So definitely the liquid sodium hypochlorite liquid bleach that you're using in your pool is much more stronger and much more economical from that standpoint than trying to just go to the store and use laundry bleach.
If I was to say, Terry, why should the guys out there use liquid chlorine over any other form of chlorine? What would you say to them? First
off, I would say, number one, it's a liquid. And that seems a little repetitious, but it's already ready to go. So it doesn't have to dissolve. It's the fastest acting form of chlorine that you're going to get. And I think that's why it's such a great shock product, particularly when somebody's got a green pool. It's going to, as soon as that hits the water, it starts the killing process really fast. So that's number one. So for shocking, definitely the fastest and most efficient form. And then it contains no byproducts like cyanuric acid or calcium. It's basically liquid chlorine is created from salt. It reverts to salt. So it's kind of a salt to salt thing. Pretty inert byproduct overall. Contributes some to TDS. But it will not increase cyanuric acid. It will not increase calcium hardness or alkalinity, things like that overall. It's a safe product if you were to compare it. And you guys had a great podcast with Alan last week, and he talked about some of the new things that have been done with Cal Hypo to make it a bit safer, but it's still a reactive product. Trichlor is a reactive product, as we learned from this fire that took place in Lake Charles. But the good thing about liquid is that it is not combustible and it is not flammable. So no worries from that standpoint. And I think it's also the history of the product. The product's been around a long time. And in the U.S., it's been used safely for the last 100 years in water treatment and in our drinking water, to keep our drinking water safe so that we don't get diseases and viruses and things from our drinking water. And lastly, I would say, as far as chlorine goes, and we'll talk about this more, pound for pound, out of all the types of chlorine, pound for pound, it contains the most pure chlorine.
Pound for pound, liquid chlorine at 12.5% available chlorine, you're saying delivers more pure chlorine than Cal Hypo or trichlor?
That's right. And that's actually something that many pool pros are not aware of. No matter what type of chlorine is going to be used in the pool, and again, as I pointed out, they're more rightly referred to as chlorinating compounds. So, you look at trichlor or Cal Hypo or whatever, that's not a completely pure form of chlorine. However, there is pure chlorine in the compound or in the mix. It's just a matter of how much per pound. So in other words, none of the compounds are 100% pure, but they do contain a certain amount of pure chlorine. And so the true strength of any chlorinating compound that you're going to use is based on what are the pounds of pure chlorine in the compound.
Terry, can I ask a question? Can you explain what you mean exactly when you say pounds of pure chlorine?
Sure. Gas chlorine is 100% pure chlorine. So if we're going to go pound for pound, you take a pound of chlorine gas. So a pound of chlorine gas contains a pound of pure chlorine. That's 100%. But now you can look at if we look at the sort of the three major chlorinating compounds that are out there, and what we do, it's based on, it gets a little complicated, and I'll try and explain some of it as we go along, but they're based on either weight or volume percentages. So example is a gallon. So you have a gallon of 12.5% liquid sodium hypochlorite, that gallon contains 1.25 pounds of pure chlorine. If you take 65% Cal Hypo, that 65% Cal Hypo is 0.65 pounds. 90% trichlor is actually 0.9 pounds pure chlorine. And when we talk about pounds per pounds in pure chlorine, well, that pure chlorine obviously relates to the efficiency, the greater efficiency of that product and how much free chlorine that product's going to contribute.
Guys, I'm going to have a little confession here to do. And I remember being in the pool industry when I got started and really not knowing much because didn't know much about water chemistry. And I'm going to have to confess, I always thought that 12.5% available chlorine was weaker than the other products, especially when I compared it to dichlor and trichlor. And I was always afraid to ask the question. I thought it was a stupid question. And I think that's why nowadays I always ask those questions. And to be honest, it wasn't until I started really getting into learning water chemistry, and that's kind of, I think, why I'm a little bit more passionate about it, is why I figured that out, that, you know, a gallon of chlorine was, you know, gives you more chlorine than some of those other products. So Terry, maybe you can explain a little bit for the guys out there that they're starting, why is there a misconception that 12.5% available chlorine is weaker than Cal Hypo or trichlor?
Yeah, sure. It's a forgivable mistake because the way that the percentages are listed actually on the labels, the common person doesn't really understand how that was measured, how that was weighed. It was done through volume or whatever. So, you know, guys or gals, pool pros, they'll look at the numbers, but they don't really have the background or the real understanding of what those numbers actually mean. And obviously, if I'm going to, you know, I've got the 3 different chlorinating compounds up there and I'm looking at a label and I'm seeing 12.5% is less than 65% or 90%, right? So that's kind of where the confusion is. And I get this all the time too, Edgar. I mean, I get guys, you know, I talk to pool pros, pool gals, and the most common thing they'll say to me is, well, liquid chlorine's weaker than Cal Hypo or trichlor. But what's not really understood is that you are comparing a liquid to a solid, and that when they deal with liquids and when they deal with the percentages in the liquid is always going to be listed as a trade or a volume percent. Whereas with the solids are listed as weight.
So maybe you can explain just a little bit about the volume versus pounds so that they understand a little bit more about that 12.5%.
Yeah, and it's a little complicated. It has to do with how something is measured. And basically, and this kind of goes back to chemistry and science and things like that. And I can confess to you quite honestly, I've probably forgotten more about the chemistry I took in high school and college than I remember. But this is something that is talked about and taught. And with volume, so when we talk about volume, we're dealing with the amount of matter that's in a space, and that volume is based on atomic weight in kilograms. And when we talk about weight, with weight, what we're doing is we're measuring the gravitational pull of an object on the grams or kilograms, and it's expressed, there's a scientific term. I guess the biggest difference is when they weigh something that's a solid or they're doing weight, it's expressed in newtons. They're actually using an actual spring scale rather than using atomic weight in kilograms and figuring that out mathematically. So it gets a bit complicated and so forth, but the best example I guess I could give you, which is going to sound a little strange, but it's just using the different methods of determining the percentages. So if you were to take a 1 gallon jug of liquid chlorine and you set it next to 1 trichlor tablet, which of the 2 of those would you say has the greatest volume, or which is bigger? The obvious answer is going to be the gallon of chlorine. So in measuring a gallon, they're going to use volume and they're going to use atomic weight, while in measuring a solid like a tablet, they're going to use what we call specific gravity and weight of a scale. So it's just a different way of how it's measured based on that. And the kind of the simple way to determine pounds of pure chlorine based on that volume or that weight measurement is you then are going to take the percentage. So the example liquid chlorine, we have 12.5%, and a gallon of liquid chlorine of 12.5% liquid chlorine weighs 10 pounds. So if you multiply 12.5 times 10, the answer you get is 1.25. So 1.25 pounds pure chlorine. Now, you take Cal Hypo, 65%, or if it's 68%, or 73%, whatever it is, you're going to take that amount, and that is going to be multiplied times 1 pound. Because again, we're talking dry weight. It's in weight. So 65% times 1 gives you 0.65 pounds of pure chlorine. Trichlor, 90%. So you take the 90% times 1 pound, that equals 0.9 pounds. So if you look at that, you can see you've got the most pure pounds of chlorine in a gallon of liquid compared to the others.
Zach,
Terry,
John, I don't know about you guys, but this is where I get excited.
like,
This
woo!
is where all that.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, I'm not a geek, but I can geek out on some of this.
I'm geeking out right now.
I am so trying to just sit still in my chair over here about all this pool geek talk that we do. I love it.
Yeah, for sure. So I think it'd be good to break it down for the guys. So Terry, let me ask you to compare it to other forms of chlorine. For example, if I add 1 gallon of liquid chlorine to a 10,000 gallon pool, how many parts per million of free available chlorine do I get?
Yeah, and this is where we can kind of geek out again, I guess, because the cool thing about with liquid chlorine, and because of how they do a volume and trade percent measurement of it, is that whatever the percentage reads on the label, that is always going to correlate out to the ppm of free chlorine that you will get from 1 gallon in 10,000 gallons. So example is the Hasa Chlor, which is the 12.5%. That means a gallon of the 12.5% is going to give you 12.5 parts per million free chlorine in 10,000 gallons. Another example would be just if you took 10%, you look at the label 10%. So that basically means that 10% is going to give you 10 ppm in 10,000 gallons. Now that only applies to liquid because they're using the volume and the trade percent measurement that you can do that. So I guess to answer your question, if it's 12.5%, you're going to get 12.5 parts per million of free chlorine in 10,000 gallons.
This is perfect. This is really starting to make a lot more sense as we go through this. And I want to kind of keep going with this and say, what about Cal Hypo? If I add 1 pound of Cal Hypo into the same 10,000 gallon pool, how many ppm of free chlorine am I going to get?
Sure. And so the Cal Hypo, based on the dry weight measurement, a pound of Cal Hypo is going to get you 7.7 ppm of free chlorine in 10,000 gallons.
So with the dichlor, if I'm adding 1 pound, because this is one that I'm not super familiar with, how many ppm of free available chlorine would we be getting in that same 10,000?
Yeah, well, with the dichlor, it's going to depend on the percentage of dichlor that you're using, because it comes in 2 different percentages, and it comes in actually an anhydrous and a dihydrate formula. So one formula has water molecules removed, the other doesn't. So you got a 56%. And you have a 62%. So the 56% dichlor is going to get you 6.7 ppm in 10,000 gallons. So 1 pound, 6.7 ppm in 10,000 gallons. And if it's the 62%, and I believe most of the dichlor shock product is 62%. So the 62% is going to get you 7.7 parts per million.
And then now on to the next one, trichlor. So if we use trichlor and add 1 pound, how many parts per million of free available chlorine do we add to a 10,000 gallon pool?
So if it's 90% trichlor, 1 pound of that 90% trichlor, and I think if we take tablets, tablets are 8 ounces. I think most of them, the 3-inch are 8 ounces. So 2 tablets equals a pound. That's going to give you 11 parts per million in 10,000 gallon pool.
I have other confessions here, guys, but I don't think I'm gonna make them. Hey, guys, let's take a minute. There's so much, this is why, guys, I'm so passionate about educating, because I'm sitting here and I'm going through memory lane, starting in the pool industry, knowing nothing about it. And it's the same thing. It wasn't until years later that I figured out that it was 12.5 ppms for a gallon of liquid chlorine. And then eventually I switched over to liquid chlorine because I did use a lot of the dry products. But confession, I used to think, and don't ask me where I got it, but I always thought that if I added a gallon of chlorine to a pool, I was going to get like 5 ppms. And that's why it's so passionate about educating and kind of getting the guys to really be able to find the knowledge so that they're really educated and they make their lives a lot easier. So guys, let's take a quick minute here to listen to our sponsors. And when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Terry Arko from Hasa.
The Hyper Pole from Ultimate Pool Tools is a pool care pole designed by pool professionals for pool professionals, featuring precision-crafted carbon fiber and stainless steel construction. Go to ultimatepooltools.com or Instagram at Ultimate Pool Tools. Introducing Pool Invoice. Pool Invoice is pool billing software that was created specifically for the pool service and repair industry. It was developed for our industry and only our industry. Pool Invoice was built with recurring billing in mind. You can print, email, text invoices, or even send via WhatsApp. You can add recurring or yearly charges, accept credits, and set up autopay. You can even see when customers have seen the invoice. It even has a customer portal where they can log in and see, print, and pay invoices. It has all of your customers' information on one page, so you don't need to search through hundreds of invoices looking for the one you need. Just go to the customer's profile, and it's all at your fingertips. It's currently in beta phase, so anyone can use it for free. Just go to poolinvoice.com and request an invitation at the bottom of the page. Pool Invoice was made for you.
All right, guys, welcome back. We are talking to Terry Arko from Hasa. So, Terry, when I'm adding liquid chlorine to the pool, what's the best application? Can I add it to the skimmer? Normally we worry about things that are acidic. So, can we add liquid chlorine to the skimmer?
Well, so personal opinion here. I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, I am not a big fan of adding anything through the skimmer, except maybe DE. And I'll tell you the reason. I did pools. I serviced swimming pools for almost 10 years in Southern California. And I was just not a big fan of it. And I would take some pools over from other guys or whatever who back then, terrible practice, but they would put their trichlor tabs in the skimmer. And you probably know, and I guess maybe John knows more than anything, in certain areas where there's a lot of trees, leaves, that goes into your skimmer basket, and now that's getting mixed in and blended with, the tabs dissolving and breaking down. You got to clean the basket out. Now you've got chlorinated leaves with chunks of trichlor, that kind of thing. I was never really a big fan of having anything in the skimmer that wasn't intended. The skimmer's intended to clean the pool out. It's not intended to be a chemical feeder. So personal preference, and I would not put liquid in through the skimmer. So from my standpoint, the best way I think to add liquid is going to be with the system running, the deep end, and just pour your liquid. You can walk it a little bit, but the most of it, if you can pour it in front of the return in the deep end, and that just helps to kind of get it going, get it dispersed more broadly out into the pool.
When I'm adding, chlorine into the pool and I have to add acid to it, should I pour the acid first or the chlorine first? If I'm using, let's say liquid for both.
Yeah. And again, this is kind of my personal preference, but it's also based on what we know about liquid right now, because the pH of liquid, which you can ask me that question later so I can answer it then, but everybody knows it's a higher pH material. And so for a long time, everyone has assumed that because it's a high pH material, we're going to have to add acid every time we add liquid. And so My advice, however, and I'll explain a little bit about this, and anybody who takes Bob Lowry's class, you're going to learn about this in detail. But I recommend you when you get to the pool, you do your water balance test, test your pH, alkalinity, and determine if you're going to need acid at that point, and add your acid at that point, and then go ahead and do everything else you're going to do, clean the pool. And then if you're going to add your chlorine towards the end there. And obviously you want to add things at opposite ends, just to, allow for proper mixing and everything. But just getting back real quick to the concept of liquid raising the pH, there's been a lot of information that's come out in the last about probably 5 years or so. And Bob Lowry's been very involved in it, in showing how in an outdoor pool, particularly in an outdoor pool, when you add liquid chlorine, you're going to get a raise of the pH from the sodium hydroxide that's in that liquid chlorine. And the liquid chlorine is also immediately creating what we call hypochlorous acid. Hypochlorous acid is the killing agent. So anytime you put chlorine in water, you're immediately creating hypochlorous acid. But the reaction of UV on that hypochlorous acid and the reaction of the hypochlorous acid to the contaminants that are in the water, actually, they break off a part of the molecule and they leave behind actually hydrochloric acid. And that formation of the hydrochloric acid is in equilibrium to the amount of sodium hydroxide that was added that caused the pH to raise. So what happens as this process is going on is you actually equalize out the pH. So you don't get a rise in pH like many people think when you're using liquid in outdoor pools. And the misnomer and the thing that guys and gals have done is because they learned it from somebody, or somebody's just automatically said, hey, if you put a gallon of liquid in, you got to put a quart of acid in automatically. No, don't test. It's just gallon of chlorine, quart of acid. And so you've got these pool techs on their routes, and they're just, it's gallon chlorine, quart of acid automatically. Well, you may not need that acid. You may not need that quart of acid, and you could be wasting acid. You could be over-aciding a pool. And so I always say, add your chlorine towards the end. When you come back the following week, do your pH test at the beginning and see where your pH is. And I think you'll find that it's staying pretty neutral.
That's incredible. John, I don't know about you. I just went to school.
Yeah, right. It's a beautiful thing. I
Zach?
think you explained it perfectly.
Yeah, my mind's going
Just
right
amazing.
now.
So, Terry, what is the pH of liquid chlorine?
So the pH is 13. So again, that we know that's high, but that's that's in the bottle. And by the way, I should point out too that the high pH, it has to do with slowing down the degradation in the bottle as well. So that's why it's a high pH material in the bottle. But again, as I've explained, what's in the bottle doesn't correlate to that great of an increase in an outdoor pool.
So when I add the liquid chlorine to the pool, and we talk about this all the time, that every product that you add to the pool kind of has a side effect or a byproduct. So when I add that gallon into the pool, what else is it affecting? So for example, obviously now we're kind of learning about the pH and stuff like that, but what other things? Is it going to affect the alkalinity? Is it going to, what other effects is it going to have on that water?
Yeah, sure. And so hopefully this doesn't sound confusing, but it is going to have an immediate effect on pH. So pH is going to rise initially when you add it. But again, I want to point out that that's not going to be a permanent situation or last. It's as the process goes on, it's going to equal out. Now, I will say in some areas where you have higher calcium hardness, alkalinity is running on the higher side, you may find that you do need muriatic a little more than maybe just in a regular situation or where you have a better water balance. And that would probably be it. But you definitely are not going to get any side effects from the standpoint of with liquid, you're not going to increase your CYA levels. Let's just say, for example, if you had a pool and you just went primarily liquid. In other words, liquid was your primary sanitizer. Well, guys, you could introduce your cyanuric acid at 30, and it's going to stay at 30. And you can sanitize your pool. It's not going to increase. There's no hidden increase going on from that standpoint. And also, you're not adding calcium, any increase in calcium from liquid.
Can I ask a question just following up on that? So, and hopefully this makes sense, but if it's kind of counterbalancing the initial rise in pH by transitioning to hydrochloric acid, once it makes that transition and balances that out, is it then lowering the alkalinity at all as it makes that transition?
No, it will not lower the hydrochloric acid will have a greater effect on the pH, and it will not have a large effect on the alkalinity.
Awesome, thank you.
So Terry, I've heard that, and this is one of those that somebody taught me, and so I always did. So, and that is that liquid chlorine should be added at like 4 to 6 inches from the water. Is that true? And if yes, why?
Yes, that's true. And the reason why is unless you are incredibly wealthy and can afford to pay for a lot of pairs of Levi's, if you pour liquid chlorine from standing, let's just say a standing level, it's a heavy material. It's heavier than water. So you're going to get a lot of splash. It's going to create a lot of splash at the surface, and you're going to get a lot of splash out. And, that can cause some bleaching out of certain deck materials, particularly like colored or stained decks or something. And again, like it can get on your shoes, it can get on your, I think when I started out doing pools, and I used to always wear Vans that they were comfortable to wear. And I don't know how many pairs of Vans I went through before I learned that I need to introduce the chlorine from 4 to 6 inches from the water. So basically just really from a safety standpoint and just to prevent that splash out, it's good to just kind of, bend your knees a little, get down there and add it that way, and you'll get less splash out.
So is it true that if you add it a lot higher, so that, because what I was told was you want to add it that low because if you go higher, then the sun can hit it and it could degrade.
That's kind of a myth. I think that's kind of a myth. In the time that you're going to pour it and it's going to go and hit the water, you're not going to have a great effect from the sun on it. I would say if you were going in slow motion or something and it was taking an hour for that stream to go from the bottle to the pool, then that would be a true statement. But it's not going to be that effect. The main purpose is for protection of the deck and equipment around and for your safety, and it doesn't splash back up onto your skin or in your eyes or something.
So if I were to look at the pros and cons of liquid chlorine, maybe we could do a pros and cons and you can kind of break those down for us. So let's start with, what are the pros of using liquid chlorine?
It's the fastest acting of all the chlorine types. And then the byproduct, so it's not going to raise CYA, not going to leave any calcium hardness levels. Safety, again, so different types of pools. For example, vinyl liners. I mean, you certainly don't want to use a Cal Hypo or a trichlor shock for sure, or things like that in a vinyl liner pool, because you're going to bleach out that liner. And so liquid's a great shock for vinyl liner, fiberglass, certain pools with colored aggregate. And I know, again, just going back to Alan's podcast where he talked about you've got some of the Cal Hypo shock, they have the larger granules and that's going to lay on the bottom. So you'd get definitely a bleaching from that. Whereas with liquid, you're not going to have that problem at all. Liquid's really easy to use. Doesn't take a lot of thought from that standpoint. And then again, the power of it, pounds of pure chlorine per the volume, I think is the greatest.
So what about the cons? What would you say would be the cons of using liquid chlorine?
Well, I think that probably the number one, the elephant in the room is degradation for sure. Liquid chlorine, over time, and exposure to sun and UV rays and heat are kind of the two main things. I would say sunlight, heat, and time are sort of the enemies of liquid. But even because it's an unstabilized form of chlorine, so it does not contain any stabilizer in it, you definitely do need to have, like I said, that 30 to 50 ppm of stabilizer with it. Again, the short shelf life. So, you don't want to buy a year's supply of liquid. I don't know that anybody could do that maybe, but you don't want to just go buy a year's supply and, try and stock it somewhere, because again, it's a product like milk. It has an expiration, code on it, from that standpoint. And also from that standpoint, I do want to say, that's why you don't want to go to a big box place and try and get some deal and say, they're having a sale on liquid for 99 cents a gallon at the big box place. I'm going to go stock up. Well, it has a short shelf life. It's like milk. It has to be delivered fresh. And I can tell you, if you're going to a big box store, and especially if you go there in the spring and they've got pallets out there that they're selling you, those pallets are probably from last year that they didn't sell. So you could be virtually putting water in your pool and you think you're getting a good deal. So I wouldn't do that. And also, I guess, it's liquid. The con to liquid is that liquid's heavy. It's a little bit bulky and clunky to transport and carry around. That's just a weakness we're not going to get around for right now.
Terry, I want to jump in. I know we talked about this on the last podcast, and I think it's important to say it again. As you're educating yourself, you need to know that every product we add has a side effect, and every pool that we approach is different. So, and thus, you should approach how you're going to chlorinate that pool. But before you can do that, you need to successfully know, or you need to understand the benefits and side effects of everything we put into our water. For instance, on our trucks, we have multiple forms of chlorine. We carry liquid, Cal Hypo, trichlor, dichlor. Reason being is we change the form of chlorination based off the readings of the pool. So again, not every pool is the same. So if I'm at a pool that has a high conditioner level, the last thing I'm going to do is add trichlor or dichlor. I'm going to use liquid. Now, if I go to a pool after a week, a different pool, and my free chlorine level is zeroed out, and there hasn't been anything unusual going on, like let's say like a big pool party, I might reach for trichlor or dichlor that visit, so I can bump up my conditioner level that week, so that next week I have a residual in my pool, as long as my CYA levels are already high on the high end. The same goes for Cal Hypo. So if we go to a pool and I know that, let's say my calcium level is a little bit low, when I'm going to reach for how I'm going to chlorinate that pool, I'm going to grab a bag of Cal Hypo shock and add it into that pool, so that I'm essentially killing two birds with one stone.
Really great points, John. And I was going to say, I just wrote an article, and it actually got published in the E-7 newsletter this month on understanding the power of chlorine. And the three main things I talk about obviously pounds of pure chlorine, and I talk about the amount of free available chlorine that you're going to get, and then I talk about the byproducts as well. So those are things you got to look at. And I totally agree with you, John, from the standpoint of chlorine use. To me, the choice of chlorine that we're going to make or whatever, a lot of times is determined regionally. It's determined by what does our source water crave or need, and how can we provide that with the different types of chlorine that we're going to get. And certainly, I can tell you up here in Seattle, the water's very soft. It craves calcium. So Cal Hypo is pretty big up here. So when we look at Cal Hypo, again, I talk about byproducts. So the byproduct of Cal Hypo is going to be calcium. And so for every pound of Cal Hypo that you use, you're going to be increasing your calcium hardness by 8 parts per million. And you're also increasing your total dissolved solids as well. And that's, and that's why a lot of times when guys or gals or whatever have been on Cal Hypo for a while, or they're using Cal Hypo shock a lot and those kinds of things, after a period of time, they start to see the water gets more cloudy. It'll cloud up, and sometimes it tends to stay cloudy longer and longer. And a lot of that has to do with just the increase of hardness, the increase of total dissolved solids. to the point where the water's become oversaturated, and it's harder to dissolve that calcium-based material. So you can clog filters, you can have heat exchanger problems, circulation gets affected. Certainly, the more calcium you have, there's always carbon in water, and so the more calcium you provide to that carbon, where the carbon is going to want to combine and form calcium carbonate, the more potential you're going to have for scaling. So that means more draining. You're just going to have to drain to keep that balanced out and to keep that, acceptable range of 200 to 400 parts per million. So trichlor.
Yeah, I was going to ask you to compare it to trichlor.
Yeah, so I think the biggest obvious thing, again, I'm going to keep calling it the elephant in the room, is CYA. So you're going to get CYA from trichlor. And every pound, so every 2 tabs of trichlor you're using is going to contribute 10 parts per million of CYA in 10,000 gallons. So I actually did a little research where I figured 50 pounds, if you're using 50 pounds, you're going to end up with about 224 parts per million of cyanuric acid at the end of that 50 pounds, an increase. So it's quite a bit. I mean, when you consider that the trichlor tablet, 54% of that trichlor tablet is cyanuric acid. So I know we call them chlorine tabs, but I think they're more rightly CYA tabs if you think of the percentage. The other thing is that trichlor is a very low pH, 2.8, and guys, it will lower both pH and total alkalinity, definitely. Certainly in kind of more of your just municipal areas and so forth, absolutely in more soft water areas, it's going to take a lot more either sodium bicarb or soda ash or both to keep things balanced. Now, I hear from guys in Phoenix, certain guys that say, hey, the calcium hardness is so high here that my trichlor doesn't really affect my pH or alkalinity as much. Okay, and again, John, to your point, sometimes regional water, sometimes it's a pool. Not all pools are the same, so that can make up for it. But definitely overall, it will lower pH and total alkalinity. It also will lead to, for every pound of trichlor, you're going to get about a 16 ppm increase in your total dissolved solids. And by the way, cyanuric acid is a part of total dissolved solids. And again, going to the acceptable levels, 30 to 50 ppm, that's what we're finding out. And I know on the commercial end, right now, the majority of states, the maximum level is 100 parts per million. But I can tell you, based on Model Aquatic Health Code and some changes that are coming, right now there's changes in the Model Aquatic Health Code where they're looking to lower that to 80. There's also something coming in the Model Aquatic Health Code on the commercial end that has to do with immediate closure of a pool. And trust me, from a commercial standpoint, you never want the health department to come in and say that there needs to be an immediate closure of the pool, because that can lead to liability and lawsuits and money and all sorts of things. But they're actually looking at a rule now to say that if somebody had really excessive levels of CYA in a commercial pool and they're looking at around 300 parts per million, the health department comes in, that's a reason for immediate closure of that facility, and they're going to have to drain their pool and deal with it and be shut down. And so let's talk about draining. You're going to have to drain to keep CYA down, to keep your chlorine more efficient. Definitely on the commercial end, it's regulated. So if you had to, let's just say you had to take in a 10,000 gallon pool, you have to go, you had to lower it. Let's say if we want to lower it to 30 ppm from 100 parts per million of CYA, that's 7,000 gallons of water that you're going to have to drain from a 10,000 gallon pool. And you're either going to have to do it proactively, a little bit at a time, or you're going to have to do it all at once. But guys, that's still 7,000 gallons of water. And that's going to lead to additional cost in water and additional cost in sewage. And from a residential standpoint, you know, you could be draining, if you're draining it, let's just say if you have to drain that 7,000 gallons, I can guarantee you if you do that in 1 month, that's going to push your customer's water bill over the limit, the allotted limit, and their water bill is going to double. And so you're going to have a customer who's going to look at their water bill and go, oh my gosh, my water bill is usually $100. This month it's $200. what happens? So that's a problem.
Yeah, Terry, I think you bring a great point. And I think we should dig deep a little bit more into CYA. I know we've talked about it a bit, but we really haven't gotten into the downfalls of having high CYA. Next week we have Bob on, right, Edgar?
Yeah, we got Bob next week.
Okay, so we got to make sure that we talk to him and get his opinions on the CYA conversation. But here's my take in the meantime. I know a lot of our conversations and talks have been on the podcast, lives, and amongst ourselves have been more focused on the availability and the cost increase and how that affects our business. But I kind of want to talk about the real reasons why everyone should approach CYA with a different lens and how it really kind of controls your pool. And two major points and things that I think a lot of the new guys, when they get into it, and even some of the older, more experienced pool professionals, some of this information is kind of new to them. And this is some of the subjects that Bob is going to be talking about in his classes if you guys are taking it. But number one, free chlorine levels needed to maintain safe water in a conditioned pool is different than any other pool. So the rule of thumb is 7.5% of your total CYA reading you should have an available free chlorine. So to make things easy, if your conditioner level is at 100 parts per million in the pool, 7.5% of that means that 7.5 parts per million of free chlorine need to be in your pool in order for it to be safe or for the pool to be sanitizing correctly. That's a lot of chlorine that you have to put in a pool and maintain through the week. Now, that's not just getting it to 7.5 that day, but you need to be able to maintain that. So we're talking about adding enough chlorine, so we're getting like 14, 15 parts per million of chlorine in the pool, so that when you get back the next week, you're at around 7.5%, because that's your baseline. No longer is it going to be 1, 2 parts per million or 3 parts per million, because that chlorine isn't going to be effective. Just think about how much chlorine that is. And the second thing is total alkalinity, and this is very important to folks out there that aren't using LSI every visit. Or month, or aren't using the either the Orenda or the NPC LSI calculator, and especially to guys and girls who use test strips, Taylor kits, spin touches. If you have CYA in your pool, you need to measure the carbonate alkalinity, because that's true alkalinity in your pool, and not just total alkalinity. So the testing methods we use gives us total alkalinity. And in order for us to get to true alkalinity of the water, we need to know our CYA levels. And how you get that, and here's a basic way of doing it, is you need to subtract 1/3 of that from your total alkalinity number. So for example, if your CYA is at 100 and your total alkalinity is 80, right? You're thinking, okay, my alkalinity is at 80. I'm in the clear, things are good. But 1/3 of 100 is 33, right? So if you minus 33, which is 1/3, from 80 parts per million, which was your alkalinity, now you're down to 47. That's your true alkalinity, your carbonate alkalinity in your pool. And the difference between 80 parts per million and 47 parts per million is big. Now imagine a pool with 200 parts per million CYA. And a lot of people say, oh, my pools aren't that high. But in reality, there's a lot of pools where you can't even test the CYA. And you're at some pools that are at 150 or 200. And just think of it. So if you got a pool of 200 parts per million of conditioner, right, and 1/3 of that is 66. So now if you had that pool at 80 parts per million of alkalinity, or you thought that's what it was, or that's what the strip told you, or that's what Taylor told you, or that's what your spin touch told you, you minus that 66 from 80, and now you're at 14 parts per million of alkalinity in your pool. And that's bad, right? So low levels of alkalinity can destroy your pool. So I just kind of wanted to touch on those two things, and I'm sure Bob is going to kind of go into a little bit more detail on our podcast next week. But guys, CYA, seriously, it controls your pool. It has so much more effect on your pool than sometimes you realize. And you might think that your pool is balanced, or you might think, hey, I came to my pool and I have a 2.0 reading of free chlorine and all is good. But if your conditioner level's at 100, that 2 parts per million is not where your pool needs to be, and it's not truly safe.
I agree with you, John. I think one of the things that we haven't done is really kind of dug deep into that CYA, and that's just a conversation within itself. And so I think that's probably should be the first question that we ask Bob next week when we have him on, so we can really kind of dig deep into that. And especially now that we're talking about educating the guys because there's this shortage of tab or the extra cost. I think that needs to be a really big topic of conversation in the educating piece of it right there. So I think that should be the first question. So Terry, let me ask you this. Why can't we produce a dry, non-stabilized chlorine product?
I think I understand your question from that standpoint. I mean, we do have Cal Hypo, which is non-stabilized. And we have also there was lithium, but lithium was really expensive. They sort of priced themselves out of the market. But I think more rightly, maybe what you're asking for something that is a greater percentage of chlorine without the byproducts and that sort of thing. And that would be ideal. That would be great. And we actually had that at one time, and I pointed it out earlier. It was gas chlorine. The gas chlorine was 100% chlorine and unstabilized. But the problem with gas chlorine is it's really dangerous. Okay, it's dangerous to handle, dangerous to use. I mean, gas chlorine is basically mustard gas. It's what they used in World War I to kill people. So it's very complicated. And to take that and try to create a compound or a dry material that would be higher percentage or more strength. I think the main thing really is it's extremely difficult, and also it would be highly unsafe to handle.
So if I was to have, so let's say that I don't know, I have 150 pools and I want to, stock liquid chlorine. What do you think is going to be my best either quantity or, what should I worry about the shelf life of that chlorine that I have there? So that obviously you said that it does go bad, but what should be kind of my rotation on that product?
Well, I would say I wouldn't keep more than a 2-week supply at a time in season. Off season, you could probably go monthly or even a couple months if needed in the cooler weather. But that would kind of be my rotation. I mean, we talked about this, and we talked about degradation and purity of the product and so forth. But again, kind of the three main things are going to be sunlight, and they're going to be heat, and they're going to be time. And there's a rule of thumb. If you look at White's Handbook on Chlorination, he deals with 12% strength sodium hypochlorite. He talks about when it's going to reach its half strength. So with a 12% at 77 degrees, that's going to last. It's going to take 6 months before it gets to a half strength. So 6%. So it's going to take in 77 degrees 6 months. But now you increase the temperature. So at 95 degrees, that 12% is going to reach half strength in a little under 2 months. I just say during the season, about a 2-week turn. Off season, maybe a couple months.
I actually have a question for you, Terry, about storage. We have a storage area that's about 500 square feet. That's an enclosed warehouse. It's not regulated by AC or anything. And then we have an outdoor storage area that's covered on the top 3 sides and not on the front, so it's open air. What would be proper storage for liquid chlorine? Is there a number on how much I can store in these areas? And then what are the temperature requirements that we need to watch out for? Because in our market, we have massive temperature swings. It could be, 85 one day and 65 the next day. So what am I really looking for in that?
Yeah. So the main thing on storing liquid is that if you can store it inside, away from sunlight and heat, that's ideal. But even in the covered outside area, it would be okay as long as it doesn't sit outside for a long period of time in the high heat. If it's inside, the other thing I would say, if you're storing it inside, you want to have it in a ventilated area. So you definitely want to have good ventilation in that area. You definitely want to store it away from any kind of metal parts, or I would say like if you've got switches, controls, things like that, you don't want to be storing it right in those areas because liquid chlorine can off-gas a little bit. And that off-gas is corrosive. So over time, it's not an immediate thing, but over a length of time, if you're continually storing it, it can be corrosive to some metal parts or even, things like controls or switches or those kinds of things. And also definitely, absolutely, you want to store it away from muriatic acid. You don't want to have it kind of close to one another to where if there's a spill or something, you're going to create chlorine gas. So those are kind of the main things, but especially during times of high heat, I would just store, when you're talking about amounts, I would store just what you need to use within a 2-week time.
Terry, I wanted to talk a little bit about your liquidator, which is your chlorine feeder. And I think mainly because we're looking at this tab shortage, and I think a lot of guys are looking at other options to be able to set up and feed some of these pools so that they can transition. So your liquidator is that chlorine feeder. So can you talk about that product a little bit?
Yeah, sure. It's the liquidator is great from the standpoint of, sometimes maybe a gallon or a certain amount that you add to the pool may not be enough to take that pool all the way through the week or whatever. In a lot of cases, what guys will do, maybe they leave some and they ask the customer and say, hey, can you put this in on Thursday or whatever? But then you come back and the gallon's still there. Maybe the customer didn't do it or whatever. But this is it's a great way. It's a liquid feeder. It's a daily feeder. It's pretty simple. It works off of the circulation and flow of your pump system. It's really inexpensive. Your charge to the customer is probably going to be $150 to maybe $200 or so for a unit. So it's definitely, I know you guys were talking about some of the other types of feeders and things that are up in the $500 range and stuff, which some people may go for that and do, but there's other people that have budgets and stuff. And so it's a good way to deal with those kinds of residential pools. It doesn't require any additional electricity, and it's very efficient. It's got adjustments. It's got ball valves, check valves. It's got a flow valve, so you can look and you can adjust and sort of dial in just the right amount of liquid chlorine that you need to feed to the pool. And that way you can put, 2 gallons, 3 gallons in at a time if you want. I think most liquidators will actually hold up to 4 gallons of chlorine at a time. And you can ensure that that's getting daily and consistently fed into the pool.
Zach and John, I want to get your final thoughts. Let's take a word from our sponsor and we'll go from there.
The sound of you continually pitching pool care poles into the trash. The sound of you using an Ultimate Pool Tools carbon fiber pool care pole for years to come. Go to ultimatepooltools.com or Instagram at ultimatepooltools.
All right, guys. So come back, John.
Yeah, well, wow is all I can say. I mean,
I'm in agreement. I'm in agreement on this podcast today.
It's like, Terry, you again, and the live was great that we did, and I appreciate it. And again, right here, again, you're dropping some serious knowledge. And as far as liquid chlorine, if anybody wants to know anything, I'm just like, wow, you know what I mean? I'm going to go back and listen to this 4 or 5 times. When he starts talking about atomic weight and this and that and all these different things, and I'm just like, oh my God, I love this stuff. And as far as covering it, we did a great episode on Cal Hypo. We kind of covered everything about Cal Hypo. And I know that, sometimes you might go, oh, well, we talk about the same thing over and over again, but we're just trying to educate everybody. And I'm just seeing it all come together right now. And then with this podcast with liquid chlorine, it's just like, seriously, you want to know about liquid chlorine, you get on here. I'd be pretty impressed if someone listened to this podcast and didn't pick up something or some new information from Terry. And Terry, just thank you so much. You have a way of explaining it, and you explain it in a really good way where it just makes it easy to grasp and understand. And, and I'm learning every single day, and I learned some from this podcast, and I appreciate it. And I look forward to multiple conversations with you down the road. I just want to thank you.
Zach, what about you?
Yeah, so I also have to say thank you, Terry, because this has really opened my eyes, and my mind is going 100 miles an hour right now. I'm ready to just get to the table and start penciling it out and see if this would work for us. So as many of you know, we use trichlor tabs as our primary method of getting chlorine into our pools. And this whole journey over the last several weeks has just really got me rethinking our whole process. So what I need to do is I really need to think about all of the factors that we have to consider as we scale up. Going back to the live this last Wednesday and the discussion about scalability and planning for that. Once we get multiple moving pieces and multiple guys and techs and stuff, there's things to consider. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit down and I'm going to look at, estimated usage and costs. We don't have any historical data on that. So these are things that I'm going to have to sit down and estimate it out and make sure that, adding liquid chlorine to our maintenance plan makes sense financially for us. You touched a lot on the handling and safety, and just kind of really gave me a lot of good information on that. I'm gonna have to look at what, PPE or procedures or anything like that outside of what we're currently doing that we would need to add. And then the stocking and storage. So, as I mentioned, we have that kind of warehouse space that's, totally enclosed space and outside storage. So I just kind of need to pencil it all out, see how it makes sense, and see if it's something that we can implement in. But I'm super excited about it. We use a lot of the Hasa acid. That's all we use. I've had a great experience with Hasa. So I think this could be a great product to kind of couple with our current program that we have going on.
So I think one of the things that we keep, pushing to you guys out there is, educate yourself, figure out what works for you. But more importantly is that you have to have a plan and that you have to execute that. And Zach, you hit it right on again, in that you look everything from a business standpoint. You're going to sit down, you're going to pencil it, you're going to figure it out, you're going to do your homework. And that's what I hope that the guys that are listening to the podcast are doing, is that they're getting that same education and that they're getting the knowledge and that they're looking at it and trying to make a plan. So I think that's, for Odd Podcast, we enjoy that aspect of it, of doing the podcast and trying to, kind of drop the knowledge from that standpoint. So the one thing that I am going to say, guys, is I believe wholeheartedly on the education in our industry, and there needs to be a better platform. So that's why, I'm so excited about a lot of the people that are coming to us and wanting to share the information and all of that. So one more time before we head out, guys, if you are looking into the Bob Lowry certification, you can go to poolnation.com and you're going to see a big banner there. There's a button there to register. You can register from there. If you have more questions on what is entailed within that certification, there's a button that says click on more information. You click on that and it's going to give you everything that they talk about in that certification. But that's step number one, guys. You need to get educated. You need to find the knowledge, and it's going to make you a lot more successful business owner. So, Terry, I want to thank you for coming on, and you've been so awesome every time that we've called. You made the arrangements to come on and drop some of that knowledge, and this by far has been one of my favorite podcasts with all the learning. And I agree, John, the way that Terry has that ability to break it down is the part that I love about it. So,
For sure.
Guys, we are out of time. Terry, thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Zach, John.
Yeah,
hey,
thanks,
guys,
Terry. See you guys
have a
later.
great one.
Thanks for listening to the Pool Nation podcast. You can listen to us live every Friday here at 8 a.m. Pacific, 10 a.m. Central, and 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. You can find us at Pool Nation or poolnationpodcast.com or Instagram at pool.nation.